The Dancing with Depression podcast is brought to you by CAS-CM, where CM stands for Content Matters, because content brings people together. Welcome to the Dancing with Depression podcast. I'm your grateful host, Adam Turner. In this episode, I'm sharing some of the tools I learned during my time in group therapy and how I was able to put them into practice almost immediately. These tools changed the way I thought, felt, and handled everyday challenges that, not too long ago, felt completely overwhelming. The best part? I actually noticed a difference. And just to be clear, I didn't Google my way through managing depression. These tools came from trained professionals. One of the first things we did was process. That means talking through what's been weighing on you, noticing how it's affecting your thoughts and emotions, and working together to make sense of it. You lead the pace, and the goal is to increase awareness and strengthen your ability to cope. But once you process, what's next? That is exactly what we're diving into today. I'm grateful to be joined by Darby Danko, a licensed clinical social worker. I've only known Darby a short time, but the knowledge, clarity, and compassion she brings to her work have already made a meaningful impact on me. I deeply respect her expertise, and I'm grateful she's here to share some of it with all of us. Darby walks us through the basics of cognitive behavioral therapy, referred to as CBT, and dialectical behavior therapy, DBT. What they are, how they work, and why they can become powerful tools for managing depression, anxiety, and those emotional ups and downs so many of us struggle with. If you've ever wondered what these therapies look like in real life, or how to actually use them to start living again, this episode is a great place to begin. Let's take the next step together and bring Darby into the conversation. So joining me today is Darby Danko. She is a licensed clinical social worker, and she is going to be joining us and sharing with us some information on some of the tools that she taught me related to CBT and DBT. And we'll talk a little bit more about that because some of the jargon, but welcome. How are you?
Thank you, Adam. I'm good. It's so good to see you and excited to be here with you.
Awesome. So good to see you too. It's an interesting situation. I think people after we talk will think, oh, we've known each other for so long, but I think we knew each other for about, 65 days. Does that sound about right?
That sounds about right.
So glad that, we get an opportunity to really firsthand see what it is that you do. And then I get an opportunity to share with you how helpful it was. Because coming into the situation, I really genuinely had no idea what to expect, what was going to happen, and also the different dynamics behind it, right? Because you have a group of people, right? Can you tell me a little bit about what that's like having somebody new come into a group setting and what you're trying to do in that particular situation?
Yeah, absolutely. So group therapy is actually something that I have such a deep respect for and I truly, truly love. So when we have folks come in, of course, it's a whole new group of people, lots of new faces, especially we do groups on campus and virtually. But you're stepping in a really vulnerable time in your life with a lot of other people that you have never met. So really my first goal is to give a warm welcome as we have folks come in and really just acknowledge the anxiety that comes with starting something new and helping to create a sense of warmth and connection and a welcome. And that's always been really what I prioritize on the front side.
So I kept hearing these initials, CBT, DBT, and I saw your face light up because you know the value. But for those that aren't familiar with it, what could you say, like a brief explanation, high level of what those are and maybe even how they differentiate from each other?
Yeah, absolutely. And you are far from alone. Oftentimes in therapy speak, there's so many acronyms for everything. But I'll tell you a little bit about each of them. CBT stands for cognitive behavioral therapy. And really the premise of CBT is looking at how our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors are all interconnected, right? So how I'm thinking impacts how I'm feeling impacts my behaviors, and so forth. And so really the goals with CBT high level are to be able to first acknowledge, right, our thinking patterns, then to be able to question them. And then lastly, kind of that next step is to be able to reframe them if applicable in a way that produces a more positive or neutral emotional response and that is more grounded in fact. DBT is a little bit different. It's actually a subset of CBT, so kind of grew off of that and was initially for folks who really struggled with intense emotions. DBT is built off of the basis of two things can be true, or dialectics, as it stands for Dialectical Behavior Therapy. And so it focuses both on acceptance of where you currently are as well as change and being able to change reactions and being able to change unhelpful emotions or coping strategies.
I probably took the DBT a little too far, and the fact that I love that two things can be true at the same time, I will just share with everybody candidly. It does not apply to a husband and wife both being right at the same time because Bobby is not, she has not accepted that. So, but all kidding aside, these are absolutely the tools that I started to really grasp, right? And so I'm interested when someone that is, in CBT, like you're focusing, as you mentioned, on kind of identifying and then challenging that thought pattern, right? Do you have like an example of like how you would help a client do that in a session?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say it is as you are getting familiar and comfortable with your therapist, how these skills are enacted and applied will look different. I would oftentimes say kind of a more gentle approach at first, because when you are looking at questioning a thought process, that's something that's so inherently vulnerable and raw to someone. So really what I could kind of share on how I do that in session is I look for what are called cognitive distortions. So that sounds like a really fancy term, and it's really not. Those are essentially negative or biased thought patterns that reinforce negative emotions and unhelpful behaviors. So I look for those. That could sound like I'm never going to get better. It's always going to be this way. I should have done this. I should have done that. And a whole host of different thought patterns, but I look for those. And I start to first bring an awareness to them and then start to engage in some gentle questioning. Do we know that to be a fact? Is that a feeling, right? Let's look at the evidence. And so I would say it's a gentle and slow approach, really depending upon your relationship with your therapist, but something that starts even in the first session.
Awesome. And I think you answer a question that I had right there without even probably meaning to, which is
Yeah.
we have access to so much information and you can go and look up quote unquote CBT and DBT but I think, just in talking with you and experiencing it, it's much more effective having someone navigate you through that process, right? Because it is something that has to be applied and it's something that I think has to be worked on. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I mean, I think in 2025, for better or for worse, there is lots of information out there. There are folks who are using Chat GPT, et cetera, for therapy, or apps for CBT. And not that those are inherently negative, but it takes away the personal connection and it takes away the power that comes from actually challenging those thoughts with another human who can provide that support and can provide that gentleness and provide that insight. So I always like to think of those as an adjunct to real person-centered therapy.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's spot on. Now, kind of transitioning and kind of maybe going a little bit deeper, we talked about certain modules within that DBT. And again, I remember when you first shared these things with me, I was just like a deer in headlights, like, I still have no clue what this stuff is. But specifically, like the emotion regulation and distress tolerance. And again, I know we're going to go high level because these things can get really in depth, right? But when I talk about these, like which of these skills tend to resonate most with the clients that you're working with and why?
Yeah, great question. So with DBT, there are four modules of skills, but the two you mentioned were distress tolerance and emotion regulation. I think oftentimes for folks, distress tolerant skills, which are essentially our crisis survival skills, are tangible skills that we can utilize to navigate distress. Those oftentimes feel more reachable and attainable than emotion regulation skills, which are, I mean, first and foremost, like being able to put a name to how you're feeling when for many of us that's not our where we're coming from. We don't know that language. And then being able to understand where those emotions are coming from and helping yourself to move through that emotional process. Oftentimes folks really want those skills and also may have a more difficult time applying them.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I stay true to myself and I tell people, whoever's listening, that I'm going to be 100% myself, even if it sometimes makes you sound a little silly or whatever. But when I first was diagnosed with depression, like Bobby would ask me, how are you feeling? And I didn't know how to describe it. I didn't know what to say. I literally had to do a search on the different kinds of feelings to try and see if I could align with something. And so to that point, is what you said, like, you don't know how to identify it, never mind like work through it, right? So these were helpful for me as well. And again, in learning these, like, I didn't know that they were going to work so quickly and provide what I feel to be a little actually a lot of comfort in it, right? And to know that there's still some opportunity to learn more. And would you say that there's a quote unquote ability to like master them? Like not perfection, but can you get better at recognizing, identifying, applying these?
Absolutely. And I mean, really, with that comes repetition, right? So I would say that there is an ability to become more able to implement them. I wouldn't necessarily say master, in the sense of I feel like there are always avenues where we're able to bring these things in and use them. But our awareness of, okay, that is a cognitive distortion, right? Or I am feeling anxious. I am feeling frustrated. That awareness can build. And over time, the neural pathways in our brain or the connections in our brain can be recreated and reformed, which can ultimately help us be able to move forward with new ways of thinking and lessen the intensity or lessen the kind of maladaptive coping skills or thoughts that we may have been predisposed to.
Man, this is great. I recall a time where I spent a lot of time reading like positive mental attitude books and would essentially take an approach that I had not been taught or learned before. And through that repetition, started to understand talking to yourself or, identifying opportunities and reframing things to be more positive. Definitely frustrated people around me because they were like, why are you so positive in such a negative situation? But I'm like, that's just the way I train my brain. And so I feel like this is very similar to that approach.
Absolutely. And it's to kind of put it in, even into like a different analogy. It's if you were to think about an athlete, how they practice plays or how they are strengthening different muscles, it's the same with our brain. The more that we strengthen it and we practice it, the more effective it's going to be.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So this is one of those situations where I was in a situation where not only was I able to seek help, but I wanted to seek help, right? The folks that you are working with and meeting, Is that the case for everybody? Are they in the same kind of space as I was?
Yes and no would be my answer. I think we experience and work with a wide variety of folks who are coming to us at different stages in their recovery. Some may be voluntold is a word I use or a phrase in which they are really being encouraged and recommended either by a therapist or a spouse, a friend who has noticed
Hmm.
that their ability to function has become impaired, where that person may not necessarily be at a place where they can see that for themselves. And we also have folks who are incredibly aware of their functioning being starting to kind of fall off and inability to engage in life in the way in which they used to. And so we do have folks who come in really, really motivated, and also folks who are at the very beginning of just realizing that, hey, life is really hard right now, right? And there is changes that would be helpful for me to make.
So, for the people who are maybe more hesitant about therapy, if there was something that, they think it's not for them, what message would you like to share with them specifically?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I really think that every individual can benefit from therapy and that there's so many misconceptions out there. That first and foremost, I think my message and my hope would be to recognize that you are worthy of support. You're worthy of someone listening to what you are experiencing in your life, whether that is simply providing a listening ear or helping you to build coping strategies and skills. That sense of worthiness, I think, really comes at the forefront there.
And I want to piggyback on my perspective, which is, it wasn't that I was not wanting to get therapy, right? But I didn't know what was going to happen, right? And I
Mhm.
can tell, from my experience that it was very beneficial and realistic and doable and very similar to what I experienced when I was first diagnosed with the anxiety and depression was realizing that I wasn't alone, right? That
Mhm.
other people were experiencing it. And to your point, the group therapy component for me was fascinating because I got a chance to meet people that I wouldn't normally meet in different stages of where they were in their journey and learn from them. And that was extremely, extremely helpful. So when you're looking at this one's always interesting to me. Like, we've grown up in a society where it's like you have to be able to identify that something is quote unquote working, right? In order to continue it. So, how do you define progress when it comes to therapy, especially when healing doesn't always look linear, like A, B, C? So, what are things that you can see that you would consider to be progress when someone's in therapy?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Adam. Something that I get asked from clients and family members
Yeah.
often. And so I really come from a strong belief that everyone has their own kind of measuring stick, right? And so what may be identified as progress for one may look different for someone else. However, I think overall, when I think about therapeutic progress, is first and foremost an increase in awareness, right? Like whether that's a increase in awareness of your emotions or certain patterns of behavior, an increase in awareness and ability to lean into some responsibility, right, or accountability for that and desire to change. An increased level of functioning in life. When you are experiencing mental illness, oftentimes your life becomes really small. Your whether that is not leaving your house, struggling to go to work, your social circle diminishes. Life becomes incredibly small. So when we see that bubble start to open and expand and broaden, that also is a significant indicator of therapeutic progress.
Oh man, some things are touching me, touching my heart, touching, my feels in a good way and sometimes, just kind of reminiscing. This one is kind of off the cuff.
Yeah.
And I have not prepared you at all for this, but I'm curious if this is something that you can touch upon. It's kind of like a two-parter. The first one is why or can you shed some light on why it's so common to not take a shower when you're depressed? Does
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
resonate? Okay, because I'll explain after where that comes from as question, and then I have a secondary question to that. But if you could shed some light, because I went through it, but I don't understand it.
Yeah, totally fair. And honestly, I really appreciate you asking that. And I hope for folks that are listening that this feels validating and normalizing. And first and foremost, that is an incredibly common experience when we think about depressive symptoms, especially as they are becoming more exacerbated and more present and intense. And what used to feel basic, maybe that's brushing your teeth, maybe that's taking a shower, and maybe that's changing your clothes, right? What used to feel basic no longer feels basic. And so there are several reasons for that. When we think about depression as it grows, our sense of motivation is impaired. That's one of the primary symptoms. So we don't feel motivated, right? We don't have energy. We're tired, both mentally, physically, emotionally, and oftentimes experience a negative sense of self, right? That can then kind of build on itself as we struggle with hygiene. So if we struggle to take a shower one day, that may then spur negative thought patterns, right? Of I couldn't even do that. And then that spirals and creates this long-term pattern of really, really struggling with hygiene, right? In all of the ways. And so I guess I just want folks to know that that is extremely common and also an indicator that support and help is needed.
Gotcha. I was looking for connections, answers, whatever. And because I had that sense of relief when I knew that there were other people experience what I was experiencing, I found myself reaching out to or joining like a Facebook group, right, on mental health and so on. The challenges that I found with it were there were what I would consider to be some very sharp cries for help in which I was not prepared to help somebody with or anything like that. And these groups are set up where you're not in a position to promote, your services or podcasts or anything like that. So for me, there was a mix of that person who I could connect with and support when they said I took a shower and I felt like people in this group would understand, and I did. At the same time, those cries for help were, not helping me and I couldn't help them. So just a maybe caution, food for thought, things to think about when somebody is considering that platform or atmosphere or whatever as it relates to their personal health and journey.
Absolutely. And man, yeah, yeah. Those Facebook groups or even like peer led support groups or Reddit, for example, can be really validating and normalizing. And there's certainly benefit in that. And also can be activating and kind of feel helpless in the sense of, I don't know how to help this person, or I'm not in the space to do that. That's not my expertise. And so I would really say being mindful of your where you are in your own recovery. So is that limiting the amount of time that you spend on those apps or threads? Is that waiting until you feel like you are in a better space with your own mood before you expose yourself to, others that are struggling or information out there? And also reminding yourself that you are not responsible and do not have to provide clinical insight when that is not your role. Just acknowledging someone's experience, whether that's a like, yeah, that sounds so hard, or I'm proud of you. That goes really far. And so I overall being mindful of boundaries and your own self-care as you're engaging in those platforms because they can be both validating and powerful and can also be activating and tricky.
And I just earned my gold star because mindfulness is part of DBT.
Oh,
So let's go. And I think that genuinely ties all of this together in the sense of learning these and applying them. And it's not about, like you said, it's not about perfection or being an expert. It's about getting better and being able to utilize what you've learned to help yourself. And that is, something that I didn't know or expect going in, but I certainly came out with that. And I just can't thank you enough for shedding some light on, starting this conversation and getting a better idea of what expectations and what things are discussed, because they are very helpful. And the value of having a professional and somebody that is compassionate. And, I marvel at, the group therapy, and you talked about we were all at different places. Like, that's a juggling that I don't ever, think I could do, but you guys did it seamlessly. And I think this is going to be so incredibly helpful. So what I would like to ask is there anything that you want to ask me? I'm an open book, and I didn't give you too much time to prepare, but is there anything that you want to ask me or share or anything like that?
Absolutely. And when you think about your time in therapy and your own recovery, what skills have you learned that you feel like have been most impactful for you in your day to day?
Great question. I think a couple of things, but the things that I use and have recognized is the self-talk, right? I had previous, had thoughts and conversations with myself, but didn't know how to navigate them. And through the different therapies and kind of, even specifically breathing is a big one for me. I had to really recognize that. Challenging things. A big kind of takeaway was the difference between something being possible and something being probable, right? I had a lot of things that were possible, but then when I asked that question, how likely is this going to be to happen? That helped me tremendously. And Bobby reminds me of those things, right? I share that with Bobby and saying, hey, man, I could, get into a car accident on the way somewhere. And she's like, yeah, you could, but how probable is that to happen? And that resets things for me, right? There were a couple of others. Even I remember one thing, kind of like the tapping in certain spaces, right? That helped me calm down a little bit. And then even some things that I think I had already been doing, but just didn't realize the power behind them. Music is something very, very dear to me. And I connect on a very deep level. And so I realized that utilizing some music throughout the day or even in the background was something that helped me get through some things that I wasn't able to get through in the past. So big time things. Anything else?
I That was my biggest question. I'm so proud of you for so many reasons, but your willingness to receive support, your willingness to help other people and to share the tools that you've learned. Amazing. Amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for giving me those tools. And, it's funny. I'll end with this. I remember, when I was accepted into the program, and my therapist had said to me, she's like, just, don't feel like you have to jump in and participate or whatever. If you want to, you certainly can, but do it if and when you're ready, right? And so I was like, okay, I thought that was a really good piece of advice because I didn't know what to do. I feel like I was ready to jump in sooner than I ever thought. As I mentioned in that first 6 minutes, I thought it was honestly going to be one of the not worst decisions, but just what was I doing? And then 4 minutes later, I was like, this is going to be really good. And I just, to share with people, the idea of this is to just educate them on what is out there to help, how to do it effectively, and to know that you don't have to figure it out in 10 minutes. This is a long play, right? And people are trained like you to help us. And I genuinely want to say thank you because it is just so impactful. And I don't think we get an opportunity to share that with those that help us. So I appreciate you. I appreciate what you do. I'm going to ask one more question because I didn't ask this and I'm really very curious. Where did your interest come from in this field?
Yeah, great question. So it really started, my mom was a school guidance counselor. And so I always, as a child growing up through adolescence, saw the benefit being in a helping profession and serving other people. So I entered school for social work, undergraduate, and was like, yes, this is it. And then went into graduate school shortly thereafter with a focus in mental health. And in doing so, got to be exposed to things like a course on CBT and DBT and really these impactful evidence-based ways of helping folks to improve their lives and their mental well-being. But it all goes back to my own experience and my family and what I was able to be exposed to.
Absolutely. We'll save that for another episode. Okay, this is the part of the podcast where most people say, don't forget to like, share, leave a review, and follow. And yes, I'm going to say the same thing. And here's why. First, it helps bring in more resources, partners, and opportunities that align with the Dancing with Depression mission, which is to spread understanding, compassion, and hope to anyone navigating their own mental health journey. Second, it makes the show easier to find. The more you interact, the more the algorithm does its magic. And the more people who might need this story, this moment, or this message can actually discover it. So, if this podcast has ever made you think, feel seen, or just feel a little less alone, your likes, shares, reviews, and follows truly help keep this going. Speaking of keeping things going, in the next episode, I have a conversation I don't think you want to miss. As a mother of two shares her personal journey and the fears she faced while trying to prioritize her own mental health. My inbox is open 24/7. So if you'd like to share a piece of your journey, make a suggestion, or just say hello, I'd love to hear from you. You can send your message to dancingwithdepression@yahoo.com. And remember, when it comes to depression, take the lead. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Dancing with Depression. There's a saying that hindsight is 20/20, which is often used to describe the phenomenon of being able to see things more clearly after they've happened. With that in mind, I encourage you to reflect back on past experiences in an effort to better understand your now. Also, I invite you to share with me your comments, thoughts, or personal exposure to depression. You can email me at dancingwithdepression@yahoo.com. Until next time, keep moving forward, and when it comes to depression, remember to take the lead.